Too much formality for such a small group. Not that we care about sizes. A group of one, it's a group worthy of our passion, of our attention. But if we are too formal in presenting the guest speaker, we get all too tight. So I want you to relax. Good? Let's say good morning again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, let's say good morning as if we are awake. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.
I'm thanking you for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Okay, now we're awake. My friends, let's start by wishing everyone peace in our hearts. Of course, the moment that we live in, it's very special. But unfortunately, we have inserted so many rituals throughout the centuries that the purpose of the moment lose completely its meaning. And of course, I'm talking about Christmas. We have created so many rituals since the beginning of Christmas that we forgot what Christmas it's all about. And that is the danger of following rituals, because what is a ritual? It's something that you repeat without understanding why you're doing it. We usually do it because our father did it, our mother did it, our grandmother did it, and this is why we do it. But then, if we don't ask ourselves the question, why are we doing it? We may succumb to this forever ritual without living the experience itself. What are the rituals of Christmas? Christmas has many rituals. This plant represents one of those rituals, the ritual of bringing a tree inside our house. Why in the world do we bring a tree inside our house? We cut a tree, we put lights on this tree, and it doesn't make any sense. Why do we do it? What the tree has anything to do with Christmas itself? Well, the tradition explains that the great reformer of the church, and that is Martin Luther, one day he was reflecting upon the truths of the gospel. And as he walked outside of his home, he contemplated the snow falling on his tree. But he could see the twinkling of the stars as he watched them through the branches. Now that I say the twinkling of the star, I just remind myself of my daughter, that Twinkle, Twinkle Star song. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Here I am trying to get rid of that twinkle, twinkle. So the twinkling of the stars through the branches. It's so beautiful that Martin Luther, he tries to repeat that same beautiful scene of nature inside his house. And obviously he cannot bring the entire tree inside his house. So he cuts a smaller tree. He puts the smaller tree inside his house. And he could definitely not bring the snow with the tree, because he puts snow on top of this tree, the snow will be melted away and the house will be dirty. So what does he do? He puts some other white material instead, cotton. And then, to represent the stars, he put candles. Nowadays, we don't put candles anymore because, thank God, we have electricity. So instead, we put lights. And this is why we put a Christmas tree inside our house. Did you know that?
I know.
What is another ritual that we do? Eat a lot. Don't we eat a lot? Almost until we burst ourselves out of our clothes. You know, some people, they open up their belts just to start eating on Christmas Eve. Why do we eat so much on Christmas Eve? Well, that's because many of the rituals that we follow, they are traditionally from the Catholic Church. These were rituals imported from paganism. And back then, most lives depended on agriculture. We didn't have computers, buses, so most of the professions surrounded in sowing and reaping. They depended on whatever they planted to survive. So can you imagine if they had a long winter, what life would be all about? It would be crucial. Even before we get to that, we just had Thanksgiving. Why do we have a Thanksgiving? See, that's another ritual that we follow without understanding why. Some people say that Thanksgiving is what? The turkey day. Poor turkey. Did you see the movie Free Birds? Oh, such a lovely cartoon. The turkeys, they actually go back in a time travel machine to change the tradition. Instead of killing turkeys, they changed the tradition. The Turks themselves, they managed to convince the people that pizza is better than eating turkey. Why the tradition was created? Well, in different parts of the U.S. were for different reasons, but mainly because they had a need to be thankful because they had a good reaping for that year. Because if they didn't reap enough food, how they would survive. So if they had a good year of production, that means they would not starve. So this is why Thanksgiving was born, mainly because to give thanks to what we have. That's another tradition that unfortunately goes by without any attention to it. And unfortunately, we usually are thankful for something after it's gone. We appreciate how important something is in our lives after it's gone. I know millions of people had Thanksgiving this year, and the table was surrounded by friends, relatives, people that were laughing, they loved and joked around. Yet, most people around that table, they were frustrated about something. Either they were stuck in their past for resentfulness, for hating someone, for carrying on grudges, or they were too anxious about something in the future. They were not happy because they're not driving the car that they want, or they have not been accepted to a school that they want. This is being a slave of the future. Yet the moment that we call present, which is synonym for gift, it's not experienced. And now we will have the year 2015. Most likely some people will pass away. And those same people that will sit around that table in the year 2015, they will contemplate the table and see that there is a spot missing. Someone is not sitting in that chair. And then that's when they will realize how important, how wonderful it was to have this person in the table to begin with. But why do we have to wait to lose in order to appreciate? We don't experience the moment. Therefore, we're not being thankful. This is the importance of talking the true meaning of Christmas, so when we are going through it, we actually experience. Just eating too much, it's not experiencing of Christmas, it's a repetition of a tradition. And how did that tradition started? Started with paganism. So the people, they were dependent on agriculture for their survival. And they thought that gods control everything in nature. For every natural phenomenon that they didn't understand, they thought a god was behind. Of course, they didn't know about the force of gravity, meteorology. None of that existed back then. So they saw the sun rising one side of the earth and then sleeping on the other side of the earth. Those are the terms used. So they thought that a god was carrying this ball of fire across the planet. And if this god did not bring the ball of fire close enough to the planet would be cold for longer than usual. So what they did to convince this god to bring the ball of fire as early as possible so they had a very short winter, well, they made parties. They made feasts. And that's when they ate a lot during those seasons. They ate so much that around the cities, they had this apparatus called the vomictoire. It's a fancy word for something very nasty. They would eat so much that after a while, they would induce themselves to vomit inside the vomictoires so they could go back and start eating again. That's how much they ate. Apart from eating, they also exchanged gifts, dried fruits, for example. And what day was that? That they celebrated this feast for the God of Sun? December 25th. Even historians know that Jesus was not born on December 25th. This is something that we inherited from paganism. In the year 313, the Emperor Constantine, he was fighting a war, and suddenly he saw a sign in the sky, a sign of a cross. So he decided to paint his soldiers' shield with the sign of a cross. And they actually won the war. So at that moment he said, Christianism should be the religion of the empire, not paganism. So he imposed Christianity on its people. And my friends, if there is something that we cannot impose on people, is religion. And that's exactly what he did. And since they were not ready for this imposition, naturally, what did they do? They incorporated all the rituals of paganism into early Christianity. And that's how Catholicism was born. The same gold that composed the statue of Jupiter was melted to compose the statue of Peter. Did you know that? Isn't that interesting? So now, instead of worshiping the god of sun, Saturn, they wanted to worship now Christian gods. Peter, Matthew, Luke, John, and now we created statues for them. And the same way we worshipped the gods of paganism, we came to worship the gods, with small g of course, of early Christianity. But the interesting point, the context that we want to bring, is that Constantine, he didn't realize how dangerous this was, because this changed the history, the course of Christianity. But one thing was for sure, he wanted to pick a date to celebrate a day of Christianity, because there was no date to celebrate Christianity. So he picked a date that was already famous to all people, and that was December 25th, the celebration of the god solstice. So this is why today we celebrate December 25th as the coming of Jesus. And that's another ritual that we follow. Why do we exchange gifts amongst ourselves? And who gives the gift? Santa Claus. Santa Claus has become more important than the birthday individual itself. And before we even continue, we are not criticizing the rituals. Spiritism does not condemn anything. It simply clarifies for our understanding. Because the myth of the Santa Claus, it's very healthy when you're 7 years old. But when you're 20 years old and you still think that the entire process of of Christmas is about Santa Claus, then we have a flaw here in our understanding. Children, they go through that mythical stage, which is very healthy. They believe in Superman, they believe in Spider-Man, so as they believe in Santa Claus. But how that tradition started? Well, that tradition started with a man that was named Claus. And this man, he had the means to help a lot of people. He was rich, and he wanted to go around and help the children who could not get any gifts. But there was one point about this original Santa Claus. He did not want to be known. This is why we have the tradition of the Santa Claus climbing through the chimney. How come this individual who projects a very large shadow on the ground, do I have to say that word? Fat. How come he's going to climb through the chimney? But the point behind that is that the original Santa Claus, he did not want to be known for the good deeds that he provided to these children. And of course, he dressed clothes that were unspeakuous, meaning you could not see it, brown. But in the last century, a soda company did an excellent propaganda in using Santa Claus to advertise their product. And they dressed Santa Claus with the same colors of their product. Why? Because psychologists, they are the ones who create commercials. They know our immediate needs, and they know how we associate things. Which company was it? Coca-Cola. So Santa Claus is dressed with red and black. Now, what's the point of that? When you look at Santa Claus, what's the message? Happiness, gift, joy. So when you drink that poison, do not put this on YouTube. Coca-Cola will sue me. When you drink that 26 teaspoons of sugar, what you get is the association of joy, gift, happiness. This is why it is so famous and so rich. But the original Santa Claus, he did not want to be known. And for you guys who have seen Santa Claus only in this region, it's natural to see Santa Claus dressed the way he is, with long clothes, pretty warm, because this is a winter place. But Santa Claus is an international figure. So if you go down south, if you had an opportunity to go Australia, Africa, Brazil, Colombia, these are very warm places in December. And the poor guy who has to dress as Santa Claus, he's melting inside that cloth because the cloth is the same. This is a North Pole tradition, yet they carry the tradition the same as in very hot places. So whoever works as a Santa Claus on the South Hemisphere, they have a pretty tough job because they have to dress as if they were in a very cold place, although it's almost 110 degrees Fahrenheit out there. So those are the traditions of our Christmas. And the more tradition we do, the less we go through the experience of real Christmas. What about the Secret Santa? Do we have Secret Santas in Maryland? Or secret friends? What do you call it? Is it Secret Santa or Secret Friends? Yeah. We might as well just call it Enemy Santa. Because if you do that at your job, boy, it creates so much animosity. Especially when they don't stipulate how much we have to spend on someone else's gift. So here it is. You have this individual going to Victoria's Secret, going to Neymar, going to Kmart's, MK. What's the brand? MK? Or was it KM? Mighty Knight, Marcus. Michael Kors. And you buy a gift from that store, and then someone brings you something from 1999. You know, that moment would take another 6 months just to be fixed. You know? So this is not secret friends. You might just call it secret enemies. You know, and here we are, trying to go through a moment that it's all about joy and happiness. If you haven't made your purchases yet, you're shopping. You go to the shopping mall right now, boy, people are fighting for parking lots. And God's sake, you park in front of them. It's a guaranteed fight. And if there's only one product that you need to get, and there are 3 people for the same product, there is a fight right there. And this is a moment about happiness and joy. And people are so frustrated and angry. The way she presented the prayer, we need so much love in this moment of trials, of tribulations. You might think that we expect an earthquake or something, but it's not. It's just Christmas shopping. It's unbelievable how we have the ability to torment, to create chaos on a date that is supposed to be all about happiness. When we give a gift, this is nothing but a rehearsal of giving of ourselves. Because as we evolve in the future, we're not give necessarily things. We will learn how to give ourselves. But giving things, it's a beginning, it's a rehearsal of what we're going to do in the future. But there's another trial here, receiving the gift. We don't know how to receive gifts. When someone gives people a gift, what is the usual sentence you hear? Oh, you shouldn't have. Don't you hear that? Oh, you shouldn't have. God, if you didn't buy these people a gift, you spend the next 6 months trying to fix what you did. And why, when they give it to you, they say, you shouldn't have. How come it's so difficult to say thank you? I like what you gave me. It's amazing our ability that we have to create chaos in a very simple moment. And as we experience these situations, what happens? The moment itself is not being lived. It's not being experienced. And that's what the story of Christmas it's used for. To help us understand what is Christmas, the point of Christmas. So I will narrate the story that most of you have heard, and then we're going to interpret the symbols behind the story. Because what we have to realize is that this man, this individual that we call Jesus, it's a teacher par excellence. What that means, by even borning, there is a lesson behind the way he was born. And the lessons will be learned as we evolve. All the symbols that are to learn, we will learn them as we evolve. Because we don't learn things with our ears, with our eyes. We learn with the content of our brain. Let's say I present this flower and I show it to a scientist. And I ask the scientist, would you please describe what you see? The scientist will say, well, I see an organism that is about 13 inches high, and the sex organs are on the top to facilitate pollination. He's giving me a scientific description of this object. If I show this to a poet, the poet might say, well, this resembles my love. It's so colorful and tender, but if I'm not very careful, I could get sick when it comes to the flu season. And he might give us a poetic interpretation. And then if we show this same object to a lay individual, he would say, well, I see something that I could give to my mother for Mother's Day. That's it. It's the same object, 3 different descriptions. Why? We don't see it with our eyes. We see with the content of our brain, the intellectual knowledge we have acquired over the years. So what we have learned from the gospel is very, very minute. As we evolve, there is so much more to learn. But today, we're going to interpret some symbols of that story, and then we'll see how it applies into our personal lives. The story begins with the emperor ordering a census. What is a census? A census, it's a way of the government to count how many people are under their government. What's the point of that? In case they had to go to war, they knew how many men there were. In case someone was not paying taxes, they just added the amount of people they should get a certain amount of money. That was the reason for the census. And only men were counted. I'm sorry, women. For the emperor, women did not exist. You were not counted as individual. Whenever you see a meeting in the past and it said 100 people, you could multiply that by 2 to count the women that were with them, because they only counted the men. Isn't that an absurd? Isn't it? Well, I don't see the women complaining. Maybe we should stop counting them again. Isn't it absurd to keep women out?
Yes.
No. Women are the reason we're here. So they were not counted. And how the men were counted? They had to go back to the city that they were born. That's how they did it. And this is why you see Joseph and Mary going back to Bethlehem, because they were at Nazareth back in those days. Because our first question we have to ask is, why in the world a 9-month pregnant woman is on a trip? What's the point of that? If you're that far into your pregnancy, you should stay home. Don't go anywhere. But here we have someone traveling this distance. For what? Well, because the emperor ordered a census. So did Mary got her Mercedes and went to Bethlehem from Nazareth? Did she hop into a bus or a train to get to Bethlehem? Obviously not. They had to use a means of transportation. And what means of transportation that was? The donkey. Now, was this a straight road with no bumps or curves, no turns, with the navigation system? Go right, go left to the donkey? Obviously not. This was a very treacherous road, full of challenges, and it is approximately 90 miles distance. If you're traveling at 60 miles per hour on a smooth and fast car, you get there in an hour and a half. With the donkey, imagine how many days it took them. So when they got to Bethlehem, they were so tired. And Joseph knocked on the first door of the inn. And when the manager came out and he looked at Mary on a donkey, he looked at Joseph, poorly dressed. Both of them, they looked starved. He said to himself, these people have no money to pay. So I have no space. Then Joseph went to the next inn, tried again. I have no space. The third inn, the fourth inn, they got the same response. People would look at them and they could see they were poor. And since they knew a lot of people were coming from different cities back to Bethlehem, they reserved the spaces for those who could pay more. So they had the space, they just did not want to give to Mary and Joseph. And that's when they had to find what they could in order for Mary to deliver the baby. And once they had little Jesus on their hand, Joseph found what to put Jesus? A manger. What is a manger? Well, that's a verb in French. Manger means to eat. The pig ate in that thing. So he cleaned it up and he put some piece of cloth, and then little Jesus was placed inside the manger. Meanwhile, they heard voices. Pastors were guiding their sheep around that time. And the voices gave them a synthesis of Jesus' work here on earth. Glory to God, peace on earth, and goodwill to all. That's what the voices said. 3 syntheses, 3 messages, 3 missions that was to be incorporated by Jesus Christ. And then we have another 3 individuals in the picture. The 3 wise men. They were our equivalent of scientists today. And they were bringing them gifts. That's another reason why we give gifts. They brought them gold, myrrh, and before they went there, before they actually arrived at the place where Jesus was born, they passed by King Herod. And King Herod looked at them very surprised and said, "What are you guys doing here?" Well, they said, "We came to give our honor, to worship the King of Kings." When he said that sentence, immediately Herod was taken by envy. A king of kings? Someone that is going to be bigger than I cannot allow this child to live. This is why you hear in the gospel the order of killing of the children under 2. Because King Herod thought to himself that he could not allow this child to become a king bigger than him. So he ordered all children. So he tells the 3 wise men, "Come back and let me know where the king was born so I can worship him myself." It was a lie. He just wanted to find out where the baby was so he could kill little Jesus before he became the King of Kings. So the 3 wise men, they received an inspiration not to tell Herod where Jesus was located. And even Joseph, in a dream, received the inspiration to flee as fast as he could. And he goes to Egypt. When he's safe, he comes back with little Jesus in the arm. And he did what all Jews did at that time, which was to visit the main temple, the temple of Jerusalem. That temple was just not a religious temple. It was also the central bank. This was the government setting. They did everything inside that temple. Inside the temple, there was a man who knew for sure that he wouldn't die before he laid eyes on the promised king. So when he saw Joseph and Mary walking into the building, he immediately noticed, he felt that the king was there. So he grabs little Jesus from Mary's arm and he's looking at Jesus and he's asking, "You're the one supposed to be our king? Where is your kingdom? How are you going to rule with no money?" Because he looks at Joseph and Mary, they look very poor. "Where are your soldiers? Where is your political influence? Where is your power?" He keeps asking the baby these questions. And the baby is just a baby. He's not saying anything. He's just doing whatever baby do when we hold them in our arms. He was tapping on his chest and he's moving all around. So he's at peace, but he doesn't understand how he would rule. So he handles the baby back to Mary. And the story goes that Jesus will appear one more time as 12 years old, teaching on the same temple. And then he reappears again once he's 30 years old. He preaches the gospel for 3 years, and then he dies in the cross, which is not eccentric at all. Dying the cross back then was a common thing. The Romans killed people who did not obey Roman rules. Even being born under those conditions was nothing eccentric either. Being born around animals. Why? Because back in those days, we had no heating system. How did we keep our houses warm? Well, we brought our animals inside our home, and because the animals, they emanate heat, it kept us all warm. So everything that Jesus did was nothing eccentric in that sense. Now, this is the story we have heard with some variations. And this is not a historical fact. These are not historical facts, but it's a story for us to get to the symbols to understand the story itself. And the first symbol that we have to analyze is when that man from the temple sees little Jesus in his arm, and he keeps asking the questions. How are you going to rule the world? How are you going with no political power to dominate the nations? And the little baby keeps tapping on his chest. He realizes in the spiritual world that indeed the baby gave him an answer. Jesus did not come to rule the world politically. He came to rule the kingdom of our hearts. Because as long as Jesus is in our hearts, all the other institutions of the planet will follow suit, will be peaceful as well. Now, how will Jesus be born in our hearts? This is not the individual, the entity. It's what Jesus represents. Love, justice, service. If I don't have love within me, I have hate. If I don't have justice, I have inequality. And if I don't have service, I have laziness. And we can pinpoint all the cause of our suffering, individually or collectively, for the absence of love, justice, and service. So when will these values be born inside us? That's what this story is all about. Remember when Joseph was trying to get to the kings and he was not allowed because the managers looked and saw that they were very poor? This is a symbol of pride, of arrogance, of selfishness. So as long as we have pride, selfishness, arrogance in our hearts, there is no room for Jesus to be born. Because pride is incompatible with humbleness. Why was Jesus born in such conditions? Well, to teach us an extremely important lesson. What is the lesson behind the conditions in which he was born? Humbleness. What is to be humble? To be humble is to be aware how much we don't know. What is the opposite of humbleness? Pride.